Imagine a killer lurking in the shadows, his identity concealed by cryptic messages and twisted puzzles. For years, he terrorized a city, mocking the police and the public with every murder, yet no one could catch him. The Zodiac Killer is still out there, or is he? What if the clues were there all along, hidden in plain sight, waiting to reveal the truth? It all began on a warm summer evening in 1968. Two teenagers, Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, were parked near a rural road in Vallejo, California. It seemed like a quiet night, a typical spot for young couples to find a moment of peace. But as the night unfolded, the calm was shattered by a brutal act of violence that would become the first of many in a chilling and mysterious series of murders. Around 11 p.m., the couple's car was approached by a man whose face would soon haunt the memories of anyone who heard his story. Armed with a gun, he ordered the teens out of the car and forced them to the side of the road. Without a word, he opened fire. Betty Lou was shot in the back, and David was shot in the head. Yet, the killer didn't stop there. As they lay helpless, the man took a moment to carefully inspect his work. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was something more calculated. The killer didn't flee immediately, he took his time, making sure the scene was left in his twisted image. But then, as quickly as he appeared, he vanished into the night, leaving behind two bodies and an unanswered question that would linger for years: who could have done this, and why? A week after the first brutal murders, the quiet town of Vallejo was already on edge. News of the killings spread like wildfire, but no one could have anticipated what would come next. On July 4, 1969, the killer struck again, this time in broad daylight. Darlene Ferrin and Mageau, a young couple out for a drive, found themselves parked at a remote spot on Blue Rock Springs Road. They had no idea that their fate was about to be sealed by the same twisted figure who had claimed 2 lives just months before. Suddenly, headlights appeared in the distance. A figure emerged from the shadows, approaching their car. Without warning, he opened fire. The barrage of bullets shattered the peace of the evening, with both Darlene and Michael caught in the killer's line of fire. Michael, though critically wounded, managed to survive, while Darlene wasn't so lucky. She died from her injuries, and the killer, once again, vanished without a trace. But this time, he didn't just leave behind death. This time, he made sure his presence was known. Shortly after the shooting, a cryptic letter appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle. The letter, written in jagged, angry handwriting, was signed with the now infamous symbol of a cross within a circle, the Zodiac symbol. In the letter, the killer boasted about his actions, taunting the police for their inability to stop him. He claimed responsibility for both the Blue Rock Springs attack and the murders of Betty Lou and David. But the letter didn't just stop there. The Zodiac promised more killings, and even more disturbingly, he hinted at a sinister game, a game he was ready to play with the police and the public. His chilling words sent shockwaves across the region, and soon, everyone was gripped by fear and curiosity. Who was this man? And what was he planning next? The Zodiac Killer was no longer just a shadow in the night. He had turned into a living nightmare, an enigma taunting both law enforcement and the public with every move he made. His letters kept arriving, each one more cryptic and unsettling than the last. But it wasn't just his words that made him infamous. It was the game he was playing with the authorities, a game that stretched the investigation to its limits. In one letter, the Zodiac enclosed a cipher, a twisted puzzle made up of strange symbols. He claimed that if anyone could solve it, they would reveal his true identity. But despite all the attention, no one could crack it. The cipher became a symbol of both the killer's intellect and his terrifying control over the situation. It was as though he was daring the police, daring the world, to catch him. The police and a team of amateur sleuths worked tirelessly, deciphering the strange symbols. Each attempt to solve the cipher ended in frustration. And while the hunt for the Zodiac intensified, it seemed like the killer was always one step ahead. As more letters arrived, each boasting about his killings and mocking the authorities, the Zodiac began to ramp up his terror. He struck again on September 27, 1969, this time at Lake Berryessa, a popular spot for locals. Two college students, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia and Shepard, were enjoying a quiet afternoon when they were approached by a man dressed in an executioner's costume, complete with a hood and a symbol on the chest. He told them he was a prisoner escaping from jail, but they had no idea that their encounter would soon become a nightmare. The Zodiac tied the couple up, forced them to the ground, and then proceeded to stab both victims multiple times. But this time, he did something more chilling. After the attack, he took a piece of a knife and etched his now infamous symbol into the car door, a signature mark of his twisted reign of terror. But even as the police scrambled for leads, the Zodiac left yet another chilling reminder of his dominance. In the weeks that followed, another letter arrived, and this time, it included a piece of the latest cipher. It was clear now, the Zodiac wasn't just hiding in the shadows anymore. He was coming out into the open, playing a game with deadly stakes. And no one, not even the police, knew how to stop him. As the Zodiac Killer's reign of terror continued, the public's fear began to mount. Each letter, each attack, added to the chilling uncertainty of the situation. The killer had now become a symbol of terror in the Bay Area, a ghost who moved between the shadows and the media. But despite the growing pressure, the police seemed to be no closer to catching him. In October 1969, another harrowing encounter took place. The Zodiac's next victim was a young couple, Donald and Betty Lou Jensen, who were parked in their car at a lover's lane near Riverside. The Zodiac approached them, as he had with other victims, and without warning, shot both in cold blood. But this time, there was a difference. The Zodiac made sure to leave behind one of his most chilling marks yet, an encrypted message scrawled on the car door. But even this clue didn't help authorities connect the dots. Every time the police thought they had a lead, it slipped away. Witnesses reported seeing a suspicious man in the area before the attacks, but they all described someone different. It was as if the Zodiac was deliberately staying just out of reach, too clever to leave any trace behind. Then, just when it seemed like the killer was fading into history, in 1970, the Zodiac once again plunged the Bay Area into terror. This time, he sent an ominous letter to the San Francisco Chronicle, taunting the police and boasting about his ability to evade capture. The letter was a mixture of chilling threats and cryptic boasts, written in a manic, almost playful tone. But the most disturbing part of the letter wasn't just what he wrote, it was the content. He claimed that he had been responsible for more murders than the police were aware of. His chilling words made it clear that he was watching, waiting for his next opportunity to strike. The letter also contained another cipher, one that he claimed would finally reveal his identity. But once again, it proved impossible to crack. With the Zodiac Killer's attacks continuing and his letters multiplying, the case remained unsolved. The killer seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once, leaving the authorities desperate, their hopes fading with each passing day. But the most terrifying part? The Zodiac had only just begun. By the early 1970s, the Zodiac Killer's attacks slowed, but the fear he instilled never completely vanished. The case had become a media sensation, and though there were many suspects, no solid evidence ever linked anyone directly to the crimes. The Zodiac's identity remained a haunting mystery, his letters continuing to arrive but never offering enough information to make an arrest. It seemed as though the killer had disappeared, leaving behind only whispers, questions, and an unsettling sense of unfinished business. But just when it seemed like the Zodiac had faded into obscurity, in 1974, something extraordinary happened. An unexpected lead surfaced. A man named Arthur Lee Allen had become a prime suspect for some investigators. Allen had a criminal record, a history of mental illness, and a number of troubling coincidences. He was also known to have a fascination with ciphers and codes, a key component of the Zodiac's communication style. Despite this, there was never enough concrete evidence to make an arrest, and Allen maintained his innocence. Yet, the public became fixated on him as a possible suspect, with many speculating that the Zodiac's identity had been right in front of them all along. As the years passed, more suspects emerged, but the Zodiac Killer remained elusive, almost as if he had disappeared into thin air. The case grew colder, the letters ceased, and the fear that had once gripped the Bay Area seemed to fade. Yet, for the surviving families of the Zodiac's victims, the pain never went away. The haunting question remained: who was the Zodiac Killer? The police continued their investigation, but with each passing year, the trail grew colder. The case eventually became one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in history, a case that would remain open, but never fully resolved. As time passed, the Zodiac Killer's case began to feel like a dark legend, one that haunted the people of Northern California, but with little hope of resolution. The case went from one of intense media frenzy to an ongoing cold case, filed away with the countless other unsolved mysteries. However, as decades went by, the Zodiac Killer's infamy only seemed to grow, becoming a cultural symbol of fear and intrigue. Then, in 2007, an unexpected breakthrough occurred. The case was not over. A breakthrough came when DNA testing technology advanced. Investigators had always suspected that there might be a way to finally crack the mystery, but for decades, forensic technology couldn't provide the answers they needed. By now, the Zodiac's original ciphers were well known, some of which had already been solved, though the killer's final, most complex cipher, the one he claimed would reveal his true identity, remained unsolved. Even with the ciphers partially decoded, no one could definitively say who the Zodiac Killer really was. But in 2007, an unexpected lead emerged when forensic experts began revisiting old evidence with new methods of analysis. They had a fresh look at the DNA from the letters the Zodiac had sent in the 1960s and 70s. A new analysis of the envelope the Zodiac had used in one of his letters provided a DNA sample. This sample, which had been preserved for decades, was now being compared to modern DNA databases. The hope was that a match could be found, providing a possible identity for the killer. But even as investigators held onto this slim hope, they knew the killer could have passed away by this point, or his DNA might not be in any accessible databases. The Zodiac's haunting legacy continued, even as many suspected that they might finally be close to unmasking him. Each year brought renewed interest in the case, with amateur sleuths online and documentary makers adding their own theories into the mix. The question of who the Zodiac was lingered, but with so much time passed, was it possible that the killer was someone who had already died, or worse, that they had gotten away with murder for a lifetime? As of 2021, some breakthroughs have been made, but the case remains officially unsolved. DNA analysis may hold the key to the identity of the Zodiac Killer, but the lingering mystery serves as a testament to the unsettling reality that some criminals may never truly be brought to justice. As the years stretched on, the Zodiac Killer became a chilling ghost of the past, his identity slipping further out of reach, his killings haunting the darkest corners of California's history. But the obsession with this case never truly faded. Every year, investigators, amateur sleuths, and armchair detectives continued to dig through the case files, hoping for something new to break the case wide open. The Zodiac's chilling message to the world, the cryptic ciphers, and the unsolved mysteries surrounding his identity inspired a relentless pursuit that refused to die. In 2018, the case took another unexpected turn, when the FBI and a private investigator used cutting-edge technology to re-examine old evidence. The Zodiac's letters, which had been discarded as dead ends for so long, were suddenly under a new light. Forensic genealogical research had become an unlikely ally in cracking old cases, and the Zodiac's notorious letters seemed like they might hold a key to unraveling decades of uncertainty. Investigators began using genetic genealogy, the same method that had helped solve cases like the Golden State Killer's decades-old crimes. By uploading DNA from the killer's letters to public genetic databases, investigators hoped to find a familial match, a living relative, or even a distant cousin who could provide the final link in the investigation. The theory was that this could lead them to the killer's identity, even if he had long since passed away. In the summer of 2021, the Zodiac Killer's case took another unsettling twist. A new development shocked everyone. The FBI announced that it had officially reopened the case. This was no ordinary cold case revival. With fresh hope and advanced forensic techniques, investigators began a renewed, methodical investigation into new leads, exploring the potential for genetic genealogy to give them answers. The renewed search, however, was met with frustration. Every clue seemed to point toward a man who was either already dead or impossibly elusive, his identity still slipping through their fingers. It became clear that the Zodiac had not only managed to escape justice for so many years but also left behind a trail of deep psychological scars on the people and families involved. His reign of terror created a chilling pattern of fear, suspicion, and paranoia, both in his immediate victims and in the wider public. Despite the lack of solid leads or evidence pointing to a single person, speculation continued to thrive. Could the Zodiac Killer have been someone the police already knew, perhaps a figure long under suspicion, but whose connections to the crimes remained just out of reach? Or was he, in fact, a shadow, an unknown person who had somehow remained invisible for over half a century? As of today, no one truly knows the Zodiac Killer's identity. The case remains one of the most famous unsolved mysteries in American criminal history. With DNA technology and forensic genealogy giving law enforcement a renewed sense of hope, the final resolution of the Zodiac Killer's story still remains uncertain, but one thing is for sure, the quest for answers will continue. The haunting legacy of the Zodiac Killer reminds us that some stories never really end, and some crimes leave marks on the soul of a nation. For every breakthrough, there remains the undeniable truth: justice for the victims has yet to be fully realized. After decades of investigations, the Zodiac Killer remains an enigma, his identity still unknown, his crimes unsolved. Despite numerous attempts using modern forensic methods, the killer's chilling ability to evade justice has left behind a legacy of fear, frustration, and unanswered questions. The victims, their families, and the public continue to grapple with the haunting reality that the Zodiac may never be caught. Each passing year adds another layer to the mystery, but with every cold case revived, the hope for closure burns brighter. Will the Zodiac's identity ever be revealed? Or will his chilling, cryptic messages remain locked in time, forever a part of American criminal lore?